Over the last 12 months, I haven't made any significant watch purchases. I think some of this comes down to just a change in my tendency to buy watches a little bit more with restraint than maybe in the past, and being very calculated with my collecting. But with 100,000 subscribers now, and thank you for everybody that made that possible, I wanted to just mark the occasion with the watch I've been coveting for, now it's honestly been a few years at least, the Rolex Explorer 2, 16570 is the reference here. And now with owning it for a month, I think it's time to do a review of it. Let's jump into it. The Rolex Explorer 2 has always been a watch that has spoken to me personally, as it resembles Rolex just in the details. And when you add on top the GMT complication with probably the best value in all of Rolex Steel Sports, you have a great combo here. Now this particular reference, this is the 16570, so it's an older variation coming with a 40mm case, different than that of the newer version, the 216-570, coming with that 42mm case. But now let's take a look at this particular reference, the 16570, by taking a look at this watch at a glance. Now the case size of this Explorer 2 is at 40mm, but when actually measuring, I found it is a little bit closer to 39mm when you go from fixed bezel point to the other fixed bezel point. Case thickness though, 12.2mm, lug to lug looking at 47mm, water resistance of 100 meters, movement is an automatic Rolex 3185, lug width of 20mm, comes with a sapphire crystal in a price range usually on the secondary market between $5,000 to $7,000 depending on the different variant that you look for. So these watches have become quite popular in terms of just demand, and that's not why I purchased one. I'm not looking to flip this watch by any means. I really did want to get one of these watches, so I just thought now is the best time to do it. But when looking at the 16570 reference, there's a few things to consider. So just looking at this holistically, this watch had a 22-year production run, and over that time, there were a few differentiators in the different models for the reference. The reference was launched in 1989, and these models house the 3185. It's a GMT movement for a Rolex that was also used in the GMT Masters at the time. This version of the particular reference here would be unchanged until 1998, when Rolex decided to move away from tritium on the dial and went with Luminova instead. However, this change shortly was changed again in 1999 as Rolex moved from Luminova to Super Luminova, as it holds its incandescence for a longer period. And that's what we're going to be finding in most of the modern day Rolexes. To determine what you are looking at though, the best indicator will be looking at the 6 o'clock dial. Now this lume is one of the key indicators of what particular dial that you're looking at and matching it up with the serial number. So just to give an overview of this, there's an easy way to go ahead and identify which dial is going to have what. So if your dial is going to have tritium, it will be marked with the sign at the 6 o'clock on the dial in the very small lettering Swiss T-25 to indicate the tritium used. If you're looking for that short period where just Luminova was used on the dials, you want to be looking for the marking of just Swiss, or just Swiss only here. And for Super Luminova, what you want to find is Swiss made at the 6 o'clock at the bottom of the dial. In addition to this, you'll have a few other things to consider if you want to go for a holes case, which my version has, which I thought was important because I like switching out with straps. Then also considering the bracelet model and whether you want to go for hollow or solid end links, which will help with making the watch have a more substantial feel, but will consequently make it wear a little bit larger. And the final thing to consider here is in the late 2000s, Rolex actually rolled out the next generation of movements for these watches, so the 3186 caliber. And then in addition to that, they also added an engraved rehat, so that internal kind of raise level from the dial, they'll have that Rolex engraving. And this helped close out the overall reference until 2001 when the 216570 was introduced. But now with that background out of the way, let's take a look at this particular watch. Now this watch here has the Super Luminova dial and is going to date around right where that transition was taking place given the serial number provided here. And yes, I bought this from our partners at Bob's Watches. If you want to buy anything from Oris all the way up to Patek Philippe and Rolex, they have it available. Awesome experience that I had, and I know you will too. Link in the description, use that link, that helps us out and lets them know, hey, I sent you there. But going back to this dial here, we have a few different versions to choose from. So you probably hear about the black dial versus the white dial, or people call it the polar, of course. But for me, the white polar dial was just always infinitely more interesting to me. I just think the black dial sports models in general, you always are just kind of falling victim to the Rolex Submariner. And I think this white dial, something a little bit more rare, especially for just sports watches in general, I think helps with differentiating this watch from so many other Rolex watches. And that differentiating factor from other Rolex models and not being able to recognize it, I think could be a negative for some people, but for me, I think it's an added plus. On the dial though, we have a few cool things that are happening here, but all of which is rooted in the idea of contrast. And contrast in general, I think, is just displayed in watches very well, especially when you get higher up in the level of craftsmanship, but very few put it into practice as well as this Explorer 2 here. The pure white dial pops incredibly well, and with this being the setting for the black and white gold hands and indices, we have probably the most legible Rolex dials out there. At the 12, 3-line text, including the logo marking, printed as well. And then at the 6, we have the 2-line chronometer writing. And at the 3, the Cyclops with a date aperture. Another reason why I like this Explorer 2 Polar a little bit more is the Cyclops, even for the ones, the biggest detractors of the Cyclops, which I know there are plenty, it's almost camouflaged with this white dial. On the 16570, we have 3 main hands executed in typical Rolex fashion: Mercedes hour hand, standard pointed minute hand, and a lollipop second hand with a counterweight. But the real area of note here is the addition of that red GMT hand. All of these hands have lume filled to match the raised hour markings. And apart from the size, this all begins to tell the story of why I enjoyed the 16570 compared to the newer 216570, as this red GMT hand it looks more fitting and serious to me than that of the playful orange, if you know what I mean. In addition, it's slim in profile and it matches appropriately with the sizing of the hour indices, which I think lends to better proportions overall on the dial, as I find the 216570's hands and the indices a bit blown out for me, and kind of takes away for the fun of the dial. And with all this comparing, it could be a cool video if I did this version versus the newer Explorer 2. If you guys want to see that, comments down below. But the Super Luminova inside these hands still shines bright and holds its incandescence well, and to me makes the Swiss-made dial variant my personal preference here. But as I mentioned, the biggest draw here is how well this watch wears. The watch has the dimensions of 40 millimeters, but when I measured, I found it actually measures closer to 39 millimeters. A stark contrast to the new produced super cases. This watch also has a thickness of 12.2 millimeters, a thickness that is more comparable to the Datejust than the Sub, being only a few millimeters away from the Datejust's thickness, and then a lug-to-lug of 47 millimeters. These factors combined with the slightly sloped fixed bezel and hollowed out end links make this a great choice for smaller wrists who wants to play around in the steel sports range. Even with the crown and the crown guards on this watch, I think they're sized appropriately, and for no second do you think that it's almost overwhelming on your wrist when you're wearing this watch. This Oyster bracelet here is the model number 78790 with 6 micro adjustment points in the older Oyster clasp. The bracelet is by no means the best Rolex bracelet, but given its age, it's certainly acceptable and I find it comfy to wear to this day. But I think a huge draw for this watch in general, especially that white dial, is this the ability to spruce this watch up with different straps, whether you want to go for leather, a NATO. I think just the Explorer 2's favorable neutral colors are going to give a lot of room to play here. Throughout the watch, we are going to see mostly brush finishing with polishing on the side of the case, the most extreme of that brushing coming on the fixed outer bezel featuring the engraved black numerals and triangular indicators to help with tracking the additional time zone with the help of that GMT movement. The movement specifically being the Rolex 3185, an automatic jumping hour GMT movement first introduced in the late 1980s, and was the caliber featured in the 16570 for the majority of its life cycle until being replaced by its predecessor, the 3186, in the late 2000s. In terms of the difference between them, the main difference is the addition of a parachrom hairspring to help with shock resistance and resisting magnetic fields. In practice and everyday wear, there's not much difference apart from a little play with the hour hand when you're doing the jumping hours of that hour hand. And for those that are not familiar with this, once you pull out the crown to the first position, instead of changing the date window, you'll be able to independently jump the hour back and forth, which will then turn the date forward or back. And I think one thing that's just not considered as much is just the fact that, yes, GMT, track an additional time zone, fantastic. But also that independent movement of that isolated hour hand, awesome. And I think for people that may have experienced an ETA form of a GMT, maybe don't have the appreciation for this, because I mean, being able to land and then just isolate that hour hand, easily move it back 3 hours, say I'm traveling to the West Coast, is awesome. Don't stop that seconds hand. I think it's something, again, just overlooked. But this 3185 movement operates at 4 hertz, 28,800 vibrations per hour, has a power reserve of 50 hours, and this one here is chronometer rated, which mine is still falling within the specifications. In other words, is running incredibly well. So over the past few years, I was very close to, and I hate this phrase, pulling the trigger on the Explorer 2. Always the reference 16570. There's just something about it. It's awesome sizing, it's a versatility, a useful GMT complication, it's perfectly proportioned dial layout, which I think is much better compared to that of the newer versions. But under it all, a level of uniqueness that I think has escaped Rolex as of late. All in all though, I'm just happy to say that I own one of these watches because I've wanted to for a long time. So now you'll have to listen to myself and Archie saying about how cool these watches are. I'll just try to keep the cussing at a little bit more of a minimum when I'm talking about it. All right guys, so what do you think of this watch? Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. An important question as well that I would love to see in the comments is, if you like Rolex, what is your favorite model? But most importantly, if you don't like Rolex, is there any model in their entire range that you'd be maybe a little bit more drawn to actually own? I know a lot of people just get fatigued with the same kind of expected designs, but are there any models out there that you gravitate towards more than others? Love to see that in the comments down below. And if you want to get an awesome piece like this, no better place than Bob's Watches. Hit that link if you want to get an Explorer 2 for yourself or any other watch that they have available on their site. In addition, if you want to take your watch to the next level, maybe you already got that iconic watch, head over to Baldassarre.com. We have some amazing watch straps available. In addition, if you want to join our watch giveaway, fill out that watch giveaway form, but also follow me on Instagram. I'm going to be doing a live stream giving away 2 watches this month, so you're going to want to follow me there. Stay tuned for the updates regarding that. And guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.